Hi, this is Dovid Orlofsky, and welcome to the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. And whether you're watching with our good friends over at TorahAnytime.com or wherever you watch or listen to your podcasts, we're so excited to have you along this week, the special week, Parshas Yisro. It's a opportunity for us to reconnect with Matan Torah. And we're going to be focusing on an aspect. But first, I want to point out that the podcast is sponsored this week in memory of Miriam Holman. That's Miriam Bat Zelig Shaul, whose yahrzeit is Yud Daled Shvat. I know the Holmans for many years, for decades. One of the people go back decades. And, what they have gone through. All I can say is that, sometimes I go to these parenting groups. I may have mentioned this in the past. And there's always one mother who says, I tell my daughter, we don't do that in our family. We set certain guidelines, and this is what we do. So she wants to buy something. It's not really, I don't know if it's really not Sanua, but I'm not comfortable with it. I said, I'd prefer not. She says, okay, mommy. And sometimes she wants to go someplace with a friend. It's not really answer, but I'm not comfortable. And I say, I'd rather you don't go. And she says, okay, mommy. Yeah. And so that's really what you have to do. You just have to set limits. Every other mother in the room is like sinking into the ground. So I finally said, Kodesh Baruch Hu gives the particularly challenging children to the really talented parents. And obviously, Kodesh Baruch Hu doesn't think you can handle anything, so he gave you a yes, mommy kid. It doesn't take great parenting if you tell your kid yes or no, and the kid says, okay, mommy. You understand? What happens if they don't? I met somebody once said to me, my husband tells the boys they have to get up in the morning and go to shul. They can go to the 7 o'clock and they go to the 8 o'clock, but they have to get up in the morning and go to shul. I said, what if they don't go? I said, no. My husband tells them they have to get up in the morning and go to shul. They can go to the 7 o'clock, they can go to the 8 o'clock, but they have to go. I said, but what if they don't go? No. My husband tells them. So when I meet the husband, I said, your kids go to shul? He goes, yeah. I tell them they have to get up in the morning, they can go to the 7 o'clock, and go to the 8 o'clock, but they have to get up in the morning. I said, what if they don't get up? He goes, I don't know. Well, that's great parenting. You understand? Right there. You understand? You tell your kids something, they say, yes, mommy. Yeah? Exceptional people get exceptional challenges in this world. And the Holmans are people who make me appreciate the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not so impressed with me. Because I don't know how people handle the challenges HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends their way. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends the really special challenges to the really special people. So it should be a nechama for the family. And, what a special young lady their daughter was, and all the wonderful things that she did in the course of a lifetime. And all of us ask that she should be a melitz yaitzer. All of us ask that it should be she should be a all of us ask that she should be a melitz yaisha for us up in Shemayim, and the family shouldn't know any more tzaros. Okay, so let's talk about Parshas Yisro. Interestingly enough, we have two completely different Yisro stories that Rashi tells us. One took place before Matan Torah and one took place after Matan Torah, that are juxtaposed in this week's Parsha. It's not the only Yisro story. There's also a story with Yisro in Parshas Ba'aloscha, when he's about to leave, when Klal Yisrael is ready to leave Har Sinai. The journey begins on Chaf Iyar, and they're setting off for Eretz Yisrael, and Yisro says he's going back home. That's a separate story. But the other two stories, one of which is before and one of which is after, why they're put together is an interesting idea. But I want to focus just on the very first Rashi. I used to give a Parsha shir in Or Sameach 5 days a week, and I had to speak an hour each time, so it was 5 hours a week on the Parsha. Okay, now when you're doing Parsha like Lech Lecha Vayera, it's pretty easy, you know. When we hit V'Yakov Pekude, that's where you separated the men from the boys. Some people who are giving Parsha Shiurim would switch to like Megillas Esther, Haggadah, you know. But if you can come with 5 hours of Shiurim on V'Yakel and 5 hours of Shiurim on Pekude, because some years they're separate. So for me, it wasn't difficult because many times I wouldn't leave the first pasuk. I would do all 5 hours on one pasuk. One time I would do it. Most of my shiurim was just on the first word. There was 1 week, Ve'ela HaMishpatim, where I did all 5 shiurim on the Vav. So that was really very special. I felt like I was returning to my Chavetz Chaim Yeshiva heritage. That we go very slowly there. If you take a look at a Gemara, you see the first word is in a box, and they say that's so that the Chavetz Chaim guys can see if they're making progress. So I go right to the beginning. That's the best place to go. Yeah. Vayishma Yisrael, says Rashi. Ma Shmua Shama Uba. What did he hear and he came? Kriyas Yamsuf Umelchamas Amalek. What about the Mun? What about the Esamakos? What about the Ananiya Kavod? There were lots of stuff that were going on. Why these 2 things? So the Brisker Rav says these 2 things were unique because everyone was able to experience it, not just hear about it, but experience it. Kriyas Yamsuf, it wasn't just the sea that split, but rather every body of water split. Every lake, every reservoir. If you had a glass of water, it's split in half. So you see for yourself. This is not something you have to hear about. You see it. I don't know how you drink it. Each half. But should I give away a magic trick? I don't like to give away magic tricks. There was this prop called the mirror glass, where you would show a glass empty, you would cover it with a cloth, you'd turn it around, remove the cloth, and it was filled with whatever, confetti, I don't know. It was called the mirror glass because it had this mirror that you stuck in the middle of the glass and you put all the confetti on one side. So when you turn it around, you just see the glass reflected on itself, and the illusion is that it's an entire glass. And then when you cover the cloth, you remove the little mirror, and all of it falls in together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, crazy opposite, you wouldn't have to do that. You would just hold it, and all the confetti would be on. That's the trick. Yeah, that's the trick. But it was something you could experience. I went to a Sheva Brachas once, and they served this orange-green soup. Half of the bowl was orange. I assume it was like a pumpkin or butternut squash or a sweet potato soup. The other half was like a broccoli soup. And it was perfectly aligned on 2 sides. I'm not sure how they did that, but by Kriyas Yamsuf, you wouldn't have to. You could just eat the orange soup, eat the green soup, and the 2 of them would be totally separate in the bowl. Very convenient. Especially when you only want a half of something, Something you just want a half. My father of Shalom is Yurtzeitz this week, yeah. So my kids used to imitate him, and you'd give him something. He goes, I can't eat this. Who can eat like this? A half of a half. So to this day, my kids like that line. A half of a half. Who can eat like this? Yeah. So it's easy. And crazy. I'm assuming just split in half, so you could have a half. It wasn't a problem. Yeah. So my question is, if you had noodle soup, did the noodles split also? Mistama, because when they went through the Yam soup, you could see the fish. Yeah, it's like an aquarium, or we say in Hebrew, an aquarium. Anyway, but that was Kriyas Yamsuf. And Milchamas Amalek, everyone experienced 2. Why? Because Rashi says that just like in the Milchama with Yehoshua, where he made the sun stand still, the same miracle took place in Milchamas Amalek. And the day did not end. It's really upsetting when you're sitting there with your watch waiting for the day to end, and it just doesn't end. The story in old Yerushalayim, they were Sephardim who populated Yerushalayim. Interestingly enough, the Boston Hasidim in Eretz Yisrael have certain minhagim that they get from the Sephardim. L'dugma, they do Hagba before Kriyas HaTorah. I asked somebody once where they got that from, and they said when the Boston Rebbe came, the first one, and came to Eretz Yisrael, he held that the minhag was set by the Sephardim because they were the ones who were here. But in the 1700s, Ashkenazim came. Talmidim of the Vilna Gaon, the Gra, and Talmidim of the Besht, the Baal Shem Tov. Now, if you know anything about history, these guys did not get along together. There were areas where they fought and they argued. Today, these aren't issues to us, really. Somebody said to me today, the difference between Hasidim and Misnagdim is that Hasidim like to sing and dance and learn, and Misnagdim like to learn and sing and dance. So doesn't have as much of a difference. It's like Steve Allen, he says, when he met the Russian premier, he said the difference between capitalism and communism in that capitalism, man oppresses man, and in communism, it's the other way around. Yeah. So the difference is that. But back then, it was really dramatic. People would, I think it was Shimon Eger, Rabbi Kiva Eger's son. His son became a chassid, and he sat sheva for him. So it's all changed today. It's not like that, But back then, it was very dramatic. Yeah, and which one of the rebbes said, if it wasn't for the Misnagdim, Hasidus would have become what they were afraid it would have become. So everyone's got a role. Some people have a role to be able to innovate, and some people have the role to complain. I understand this. Both of them are legitimate, As the Chassam Sofer says, Chodesh Osam in the Torah. And anytime you're going to do something new, you get a little suspicious. Rabbi Yisrael Salanta met opposition when he was trying to start the Musa movement. People got nervous. This guy's starting this new thing. What's going on here? Yeah. So they were anti-Muserniks. Not because they were anti-Musa, they were anti the Musa movement. Today they were anti-Muserniks. They're against Musa. We've embraced chutzpah with both hands. Anyway. When you say to a kid today, that's chutzpah, he goes, yeah, it's chutzpah, yeah. Anyway, I digress. So the Hasidim would go to the mikvah on Shabbos. The Misnagdim felt that this was usher. So one Shabbos, the Hasidim show up, and they see that there's a chain locked up the mikvah. They were very upset. So they waited till Hanukkah. Revenge is best served cold. Yeah? And the Talmidei Agra would light exactly at Shkia. How do you know when Shkia was? So the guy up in the minaret, he calls them to prayers at different times, and one is exactly at Shkia. So they would wait for Shkia to hear, I have the whole album. But anyway, so my favorite Mezunin tunes. Anyway, but I said, "When you know any Mezunin terms?" Yeah, Rabbi Zainab. It's not the same thing. But anyway, so they paid off the guy to do it 20 minutes late. So for 20 minutes, they're standing there with their candle. The wax is melting on them, waiting, and the guy doesn't come in. So here they are, they're all waiting, and the sun doesn't set. So everyone knew about Kriyas Yasov and Mechikas Amalek. Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz says, Pshat and Rashi is like this. Ma Shama Yisro Uba. It wasn't just that he heard something. He had to have heard something that inspired him to come. What moved him to be able to now come and join the Jewish people? And says Chaim Shmulevitz, it was the combination of Kriyas Yam Suf and Milchamas Amalek. What does that mean? Kriyas Yamsuf was an event unlike any in history. It's hard for us even to imagine it. You take a sea and you split it in half, and then you dump it on top of your enemies. So what do you do then? If you can control the oceans, and this was something that made such an impression on the collective subconscious of the nations of the world, that even after the Churban Beis HaMikdash, Titus is going to get into a boat and there's a storm, and he says, "Oh yeah, I forgot, you only have power out at sea." Yeah, it was because of Kriyas Yamsuf. This made such an impression. And you read Noz Yoshir, the trembling, the fear, the panic. Kol Yoshvei Knan, right? It says they just melted. How do you fight an enemy who can drop the ocean on top of you? It's outside. It's outside of normal functioning. Forget about normal functioning. I understand a miracle, but this is beyond anything. And that was it. The Jewish people were untouchable. You couldn't do a thing to them after that. And we would have gone to Har Sinai, gotten the Torah, walked into Israel, and everybody would have just. Vayi ben Zaharon vayomer Moshe kumo Hashem v'yafutzu oivecha v'yanusu misanecha mipanecha. We would have marched into Israel, and all the enemies would have fled, and they all would have died, and that would have been the end of it. Raise your hand against a Jew. Came along Amalek and attacked us. And they were defeated. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter. Because all they had to do was show that you could be attacked. And the nations of the world said, I'm not afraid of the Jews anymore. The Jewish people aren't that frightening. And now they were free to attack us. Now let me ask you a question. If you think about it logically. So Amalek went out and they attacked him and they were destroyed. Does that change the reality that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was able to drop the ocean on top of the Mitzrayim? And the answer is inspiration disappears. And if you're inspired and you're moved and you don't do something about it to turn it into reality, then the inspiration is just going to slip away. And that's the story of history. How many times have people been moved? Right? You see, sometimes people go to a shiur, they hear something, they see something, something amazing takes place, and then their phone rings, and they get a phone call, and it just disappears. The magic vanishes. Says Yisro, I saw Kriyas Yamsuf, and I was as moved as everybody else in the world. And then I saw Milchamas Amalek, and I saw how the feeling disappeared, and I said, I got to do something. What did Yisro hear that made him come? It was the fact that inspiration alone is not enough. You have to do something with it. And this is the challenge. This is the challenge every single day of our lives. We look for inspiration. I give a shiur Motzi Shabbos in Har Nof every other Saturday night. I've been giving it for years. And somebody asked me once, it looks like you have a certain formula here. Each one looks a little different, yeah. But you have a certain formula. I said, I'll tell you what my formula is. I said, I want to say a chiddush, because I have people who are Talmidei Chachamim who come, who really know how to learn. My wife is always surprised that friends of hers who she considers to be intellectually brilliant come to my shir. She's like, you know who was there? So I like to say a chiddush. I like to be practical because you have to turn it into a reality. And I want it to be entertaining because people enjoy listening to something that's entertaining. If something is, a little, even if you want to, sometimes it's hard to keep it. And so I want to keep it entertaining. And I want it to be inspiring because I know for some people, this is the only shir that they go to. This is true also about the podcast. I've received letters from people who say, this is the only learning I do in my week, because I listen to this podcast. My advice is, get a life. But anyway, no, I mean, this it is what it is. Want to hear a great story? Sure you do. Yeah. There was this fellow who used to come to a shir every night. He was a Svardish fellow. And there was a Svardish Chacham who gave the shir. And this guy would come in every night for the Rav, and the shir would start and he'd fall asleep. And he slept through the whole shir until the chairs all started scraping at the end, and he'd get up and go, kol kavod, kvod Rav, toda rabba, and he'd leave. And he did this night after night. So finally the Rav says, listen, I feel bad for you. Why don't you just, go home and get some sleep, He says, kvod Rav, I get up before the sun, and I'm a laborer. I work very hard. At the end of the day, all I want to do is go home, take a shower, have something to eat, and go to sleep. But I want my children to see that I go to a shir. I'm sorry for the Rav's kavod that I fall asleep, but my children have to see that I go to a shir. That's the story, and it's a great story. And somebody told me, I guess you never heard the end of the story. The end of the story is the Chacham said that's very impressive. But you also have to learn. I'm very inspired. But now do something. The inspiration alone is only going to take you so far. You have to do something with it. A spark without fuel. You get inspired. Now what happens? And that becomes our challenge in life. You get inspired, something moves you, what do you do with it? I've told this story in the past. There is a wonderful woman in Beit Shemesh, Rebbetzin Pinhasik, and she started an organization called Likrat Kala to provide the basics for Kalas who just don't have the money to buy dish towels, pots and pans, linen, all the basics. So sometimes those things slip away. You don't always think about that. My parents bought me a dining room set. Well, for tax purposes, the accountant told them you have to gift a certain amount of money to each kid every year. So they said, look, we could give you the money, but you just go blow it on something. I said, yeah, like food or electricity or something, So he says, so instead I'm going to buy you a dining room set. Because until then we had, whatever. So we get this big dining room set, and big chairs and a big break front. And then they realized they had to get something to put into the break front. Because, we were basically putting in the kids' projects from Gan, and, you have to have something to go into a break front. So bit by bit, they would buy us, gifts. But, inspiration is like you have the break front, you have nothing inside. You get moved, there's a spark, but you need fuel. It has to catch on to something. So she told me the reason she started this organization was because she heard me talking at a shir about how any person can change the world. We all have the power to change the world. And she says, I'm going to change the world. So over 1,000 collars have been provided for by this organization because she was inspired, as I'm sure everybody is when they go to one of my shiurim. And she decided to do something about it. But there are always people who are inspired. People get inspired, people get moved, and what happens? Where does it go? I heard this story from Rav Kimchi. It's such a powerful story. He was in the Yom Kippur War. Now, the Yom Kippur War was a very serious time for the Jewish people. It was beyond our understanding. And the 6-Day War, we understood, was an existentialistic threat. Your entire country is 9 miles wide. How much does it take? Egypt had the largest air force. Syria controlled the Golan Heights, which were considered unconquerable. The Arab Legion from Jordan was considered the best armed force in the Middle East. And we were a little country, And everyone thought it was the end of us. So we won this tremendous victory, and there was pressure being put on Israel in order to try to get them to make a peace deal. So it turns out that they knew about this attack, the Americans, and they didn't let us know. And we were literally out of ammunition. We were down to our last bullets. If General Haig didn't airlift in all those armaments, we would have been finished. We wouldn't have a bullet to shoot. It came out later that Golda Meir and her cabinet were carrying cyanide tablets to commit suicide, so they didn't, afraid they'll get captured and be tortured. That's how bad things were. I mean, we were talking about an existentialistic threat. I mean, this was the end. Anyway, the Syrians had the latest tanks. Of course, they had armor-piercing shells, and they had night vision. Our tanks didn't have night vision. We didn't really rebuild the military after the 6-Day War. I was once sitting on a bus with one of the tank commanders who captured the Golan Heights. He told me most of our tanks were so old, I couldn't even get them up the hill to the Golan Heights. I said, anyone whose tank works, come with me. That's how we captured the Golan Heights, yeah? So Rabbi Kimchi says, we had these old tanks, and we settled down for the night. And the Syrians on the next field, now they had night vision. They could see us. We couldn't see them. And suddenly a shell comes down and falls. We realized they were aiming. There was a test shell. So the commander gets on the microphone and he says, evasive maneuvers. And we all start moving, and then he realizes we have no place to go. He says, forget it. Just settle down and wait. Hope for the best. Rabbi Kimchi said it rained shells. And any of these that would have hit the tank would have been finished. The descriptions of the people I spoke to who were in the Rabbanut in the army, whose job it was to collect the dead, he says there was no way to collect out of these tanks. It was just ashes. So the tanks are settled down and the shells are raining down. He says, I was inside the tank and it was shaking. I was waiting at any minute to die. And it went on for a long time. And finally, the shelling stopped. And there's silence. And the radio in the tank crackles, and it's the commander. And he says, casualties report in. Silence. He says, damage report in. Anyone who's damaged. The radio crackles, and someone says, the door of our half-track was blown off. Anybody injured? No. So we're sitting in this tank. We can't see. We don't know anything. I'm starting to think that we're the only ones left alive. So I start to raise the turret to look outside. And all across the field, every tank is raising its turret to look out. They missed us all. I'm telling you, we fell out of the tanks laughing. We couldn't believe it. All around the ground around us was pockmarked with shells. They didn't hit one tank. In the morning, I went out to put on my tefillin, and you can imagine what it meant to me. To daven after that kind of a miracle. There's a tap on my shoulder. No, kimchi, yalla. I said, we're pulling out already? And I see the whole tank group, every soldier there is lined up waiting to put on my tefillin. and say Shema Yisrael. I was the only religious guy in the entire group. And they all put on my tefillin. They all said Shema. In this moment of inspiration. So I was like, wow, what happened? Nothing. That was it. They all went back to their lives as if nothing ever happened. I heard this story. I heard it with the name of a particular Gadol B'Yisrael, but I never confirmed it, so I'm not going to say it. I'll just tell you the story the way that I had heard it. In between World War I and World War II, there were people who used to come to Europe to learn, the great yeshivas. And somebody was on a boat, and he was on his way to be able to go to Europe, to be able to learn in one of the great yeshivas, me or wherever. And he, of course, couldn't afford a first-class ticket. He was in steerage with the luggage. And there's a little hole in the wall, and he looks through the hole in the wall, and he sees him looking into the grand ballroom. And in the grand ballroom, there's a costume ball going on, and the band in their tuxedos are playing, and there's fine food on all the tables, and people are dancing. Yeah. Okay. Goes back to his Gemara. And suddenly a wave hits the boat and knocks it on its side. I mean, that's it. It's finished, no? You're going to die. And everybody thought this is the end. He says, I was thrown against the wall and I could see through the eye hole, and everything was pandemonium. Everything had fallen to the ground, and all the people were on their knees praying for a miracle. This was the end. And a miracle happened. A wave came from the opposite direction and righted the boat. So, of course, I was thrown back, landed on the floor, and I couldn't believe it. I was sure I was dead. And so I took up my Sefer Tehillim, to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the miracle. And then I thought, all those people who were living those meaningless lives, we must have been so changed by this experience. So I looked in the hole to see what was going on. And everyone was looking at each other, kind of sheepishly. And the orchestra picked up their instruments and started playing. And the crew came and cleaned up the mess and put out new plates of food. And everyone got up and brushed themselves off and went back on with the party as if nothing had ever happened. When I was younger and I used to do kumzitzim, when I was young and happening. Now I'm old and happened. But I'd give kumzitzes. I'd always just say, people would sit on the floor. We'd sing songs. We'd give inspiring stories, People would share personal thoughts. And I'd say, at the end, don't just pick yourself up and brush yourself off. Turn this into something, whatever it is, something little. We have to move ourselves. I've done Segel once rented an apartment with this beautiful view of Yerushalayim. Now, one of the wonderful things about living in Yerushalayim is the beautiful views. No question about it. But like everything else, it becomes mundane. You take it for granted. Rabbi Orlofsky told this story publicly, so I feel comfortable saying it over. He says, I used to teach in Eshet Torah, and I would take the bus or the cab, and I'd get to the Western Wall Plaza, and I would go through security, and I'd run up the steps to get to my class. And one day I realized I didn't even turn to look at the Kaisel. I didn't even look at the Western Wall. It had become so ordinary to us. It's hard to believe, especially for the younger viewers, and as we've already established, I've got people of all ages watching. Even Yom Kippur can become rote. You know it so well, you got it down. It's long, but at least you know it. You know how it goes. Yeah. But I passed by the kotel. I didn't even think about it. So Dan Segel says to the owner, do you appreciate this view? So he looks, he says, yeah. He goes, it can't become ordinary. Every morning I would get up and I would look at the view and I said, I don't want to take this for granted. And I'd say a posik, Ma rabu ma'asecha. Look how wondrous are your works of creation. I should point out that the term yira, which is translated as fear of God, doesn't mean fear. It means awe. It means wow. When you look at something and you go, wow. When you go to Cape Town, South Africa, and you see Tabletop Mountain, which is this giant rectangular mountain with a cloud on top of it, and the city's built around it, and the ocean goes around it, and you look at it, and it's hypnotic. Wow. When you drive through Arizona, through the painted desert, and you see the sands, all the different colors, and you go, wow. When you're Yerushalayim and you see a sunset, and the sky turns all the colors, and you say, wow. But you got to do something. You got to say something. You can't just go, well, that's amazing. I was deeply moved. Not enough to be moved. So the yurtzeit this week is somebody who lived their life, not just inspired, but turned the inspiration into real things. So just another shout out to the Holmans and to the memory of their daughter Miriam, who lived the exceptional life. And I can say about the whole family, really. And one of our big fans from America is here and asked us to give a shout out, Bloomy Benedict from Lakewood. She said she's been a fan since the beginning, and she schlepped all the way from America just to be part of the audience. And I was asked to give a shout out to the Cohens in the San Fernando Valley. Your daughter said to tell you she's doing fine. And that's about it for this week. And they're not sponsoring, but they asked, if I could give them one last shout out, and that's, of course, Shas for Shiduchim. The link is still going to be there. If you want to sponsor a page of Gemara for a single to be able to find the Shidduch on Tu B'Shvat, it's something very special. And that's about it. If you want to find out more about the show, go to RabbiOrlofsky.com. You can add comments, see my event schedule, contact me directly. If you want to join the new online shiurim, Daf Yomi, we are moving along. Or I have two different Mesilas Yesharim shiurim. One's a ladies only, and one's made up of people of all genders and whatever. You can't say anything today. But anyway, but the second one, the people only self-identify as women. Anyway, so we're still at the beginning. We're still in the introduction, so you can join anytime. Go to RabbiOrlofsky.com/live. If you would like to sponsor an episode, go to RabbiOrlofsky.com/sponsor. And that's it for this week. Happy Tu B'Shvat. And everyone should have a beautiful week. Should be Zeicha to a Matan Torah. My name is David Orlofsky, and this is the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.
It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Knowledge and wisdom will help you grow. Lots of fun in every episode, and we don't have to rhyme. No, we don't. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show on RabbiOrlofsky.com. Torah anytime, YouTube and more. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Torah and Simcha, ready to go. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. Till next time, till we meet again. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show. It's the Rabbi Orlofsky Show.